fast forward years later, I'm now fasting 30 days, not hearing anything from the Lord, getting really strong in my closeness and trust with him, but didn't hear any rhema word. After 30 days of fasting and not eating, I had nada. But I continued to travel and minister and we did these conferences called stirrings that God had given me a vision for, to stir up the gift of God that's within the church. And it was focused on the Holy Spirit, renewal, impartation, and healing. And I'm going to church. I'm going to healing ministries and healing schools and ministering in this capacity. And there was this healing rooms ministry that invited me out to Washington State. And I'm in Pullman, the city of Pullman at Washington State. And I'm at this small group teaching them and equipping the saints for the work of ministry. That's what I felt God called me to do under the umbrella of Global Awakening. That's the calling. That's why I love this ministry, to equip the saints for the work of ministry. It's not about one man or one woman. It's about that we're all the saints. We all have the Holy Spirit, and we all get to play. It's not about surrounding one person. Although I do believe there are gifted men and women who are called to certain offices, I also believe that the church is empowered to go and win the lost, heal the sick, raise the dead, cast out demons. Come on. So during one of the breaks, we decided, hey, let's go to this. There's a Division I school called Washington State with this huge campus, and so we decided to go to this campus. And we were just looking around. This campus is so large; it has 30,000 students. It has its own pharmacy. It has its own stores and stuff like that, because it needs to be sustainable for all the students. And so it's kind of like the only thing in Pullman, really. Everything else is farming. And so when we're there, my friend who's sitting next to me, he says, "Man, as soon as we went onto the campus, he goes, I feel like there's a spirit of suicide here." And my friend is a joy person. He's never in the negative. He's always in the positive. If there's a negative situation, he only sees the positive possibilities. So for him to say that caught my attention. I said, yeah, man, I feel like there's hopelessness here. I mean, there's just something spiritual about this. My one other friend, he was with me. He's a prophet. He said, let's go to the bookstore. I feel like the Lord's having us go to the bookstore or library. So we go to the bookstore area, tons of students around there. And there was this one guy that my friend meets outside the bathroom, and we find out, he was crying. And so he's like, hey, you all right, buddy? And he's like, well, one of the prominent students on campus just committed suicide. And one of his relatives had committed suicide not too long ago, and so it had re-triggered all this emotion. And that student was a manager at Rite Aid, and so the school was suffering. And so we ministered to him, and then we left, and we're driving off campus. As we're driving off campus, I see this Division I stadium, basketball stadium to my right. And as we're passing it, going off of campus, I look at myself pointing at it and going, I wonder what it would cost to rent that. It was such a surprise to me. I put my hand down. I was like, I didn't even know that. You ever watch yourself do something? It felt like that. And so it so shocked me. One, I don't have any money. It doesn't matter what it costs. I didn't feel called to do a stadium evangelism. God, what are you asking me to do? But I didn't want to be disobedient. I wanted to knock on that door. Maybe it was a test. Maybe God wanted to see if I'd say yes and then be like, okay, you wouldn't do that. But we go back to where we're staying, and me and my friend, we look up and we said, man, if we were to rent this, when would the stadium be available? And we saw that the first Friday that school's in session, there's no basketball game, there's no football game, but school is just in session. The stadium's available that day. Or at least nothing's going on the school calendar. So I make the coldest cold call you can make. I mean, I don't know anybody, not connected with any church. I go on the website, find a number, which I think could be possibly the person, and I make a phone call to a stadium director person, and I leave a voicemail. Hi, this is Paul from Global Awakening. Just wondering if the stadium would be available to rent, how much it would cost on this date, and I'll talk to you later. Bye. And I thought, wow, that's over with. Passed that test. never thinking I'd ever get a call back. But the next day I get a call back, and it's the director of the events for the stadium. And he says, hi, you're wondering about the stadium. He says, who are you guys? Are you a political organization? Would there be protesters there? Because there was a lot of political rallies going on at the time, and it was creating a lot of problems for the universities, and they didn't want to get involved in that. And so I said, I hope there's not going to be protesters. I said, we're not a political organization. And I just started sharing this vision that I had not thought out at all, but it was a God thing that I was saying them, like they were faith statements. And if faith wasn't behind them, they would have been lies. But there was faith. Because I said, well, we want to come, and we're a Christian organization, but we want to come and bring hope to the campus, and we want to bring athletes and actors and musicians who are leaders in the mountains of these influence who could hear testimonies of hope. They could share their, and then we're a Christian organization, so at the end we'll have a call for salvation. And he said, wow. I said, but I was just even wondering if it was available. This is only 8 months away. If you ever want to rent a stadium, you got to rent them like 2 years out. He goes, especially at a Division I school, he goes, wow. He says, it's really funny. He says, the dates before are all booked and the dates after are all booked, but that one day, that one Friday night, it's available. I said, well, how much would it cost? Knowing that this would be the final door that would shut on me, because I have friends who've rented stadiums before, and they were $150,000 for the day. And I can't even think of numbers that high. So I said, so I'm expecting this large number. And he says, well, let me ask you a few things. Are you going to sell tickets to this thing? I said, no, it'd be absolutely free. He said, can we sell food there? I said, you could sell all the food you want. He said, I really like what you're doing. I like the message that you just shared. I found out later this guy isn't even a Christian. Let me just share a little insight. The world is looking for peacemakers, craving for them, and they don't know where to go. He said, I really like what you're doing. He says, I think, and I hear the man lean back on his office chair, like, you know? He goes, I think we can get you the stadium, every room in it, the stage for $7,500. I almost fell out of my chair. I didn't have $7,500, but I had faith for that. It was one of the hardest things to do. I didn't have any connection with any churches or businesses, but God gave me this step-by-step plan. And I invited pastors to a nice lunch. And I knew pastors like to eat, so if you give them food, oftentimes they'll come. And so I asked, what's a really nice restaurant? Let's invite them out. And I shared with Randy and the team there the vision. They said, we'll support you. We'll see if this Lord will support you. And so we were able to pay for a lunch for pastors. And I just said to the pastor, I said, you're the fathers of this city. I believe the Lord's given me this opportunity. Do you want me to do it? And over 28 pastors and churches responded, and they said yes. I had a big problem on my hands. I didn't know any athletes, actors, musicians. I mean, I knew famous Christian, famous Christian ministers and Christian worship bands, but I didn't want to fill a stadium with Christians. I wanted to fill the stadium with the lost. And I'm sorry, but the lost don't come to hear often famous Christians that are Christian in the Christian world. I wanted people who are leaders in these other mountains who are Christian. There's a difference. So I called my friend who I had just met the week before, who was the NBA All-Star chaplain for the NBA All-Star team. It was just a God appointment. And I called him. I said, hey, man, this is what happened. And I got this stadium, and I don't know what I'm doing. And I told him that there'd be athletes there. I don't know any athletes and musicians there. Can you help me? And he said, Paul, let me see what I can do. He says, that's the Lord. You got a stadium for 7,500. That's the Lord. And he calls him back. He says, I have Sean Alexander, who played for Washington State and Seattle Seahawks, MVP in the NFL, running back. He said he would come speak. I said, I don't have any money. He says, it's for the gospel. It's free. He doesn't need any money. And then I got a text message that Antoine Randall L., who was a Pittsburgh Steelers Super Bowl champion, wide receiver, said, I'll come and share my testimony. And then there was actors from the Fast and Furious and comedians who are Christian but are influencing in the world. And so God was putting people. It was the largest interdenominational gathering they ever had in terms of church unification. God gave us this idea to make it a on-site campus, that the student-run campus thing. So we were able to promote Hope Fest through the whole campus. And we did a private after party that was on the lawn from 10 p.m. to midnight. And God gave us this idea to do baptisms on the lawn. And so we had a DJ and we had free food, and everyone who got saved, hundreds of students got saved that night. We pulled them through the tunnel. There was a businessman, he just came out with this new technology where he has these workout shirts that are gray, but when they get wet, the face of Christ appears. And he gives them to us. And we talked about baptism, and we had the athletes baptizing the newly saved students coming up. It's one of the most beautiful videos. I should have had it queued. I'm sorry, I don't. It was one of the best nights of my life, besides being married to my wife and my children being born and having my own salvation. It was watching these students come to know Jesus Christ. It was one of the hardest times in my life, one of the loneliest times in my life. And if I didn't go through the times of waiting on the Lord and loving my process, I would have never been able to do what God had called me to do in that time frame. I remember I was thinking about the altar call. God, who's going to give the altar call? Who's going to be the one to give the salvation call? And it was so tempting. Can I just be real with you? It's so tempting as a minister to say, I'm going to be the one. Paul Martini, the evangelist. And I can tell everyone how I stood on stage and gave the call of salvation. I'll count both of their hands. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. But I knew there was a friend of mine who was a better evangelist than me. He just was gifted. I said, I'm going to ask him to give the altar call, because I know he'd be so impactful and speak even strategically to them. And I just knew it was the Lord. And I think God was just looking for somebody who he could trust that wouldn't take the glory for themselves. I don't know if I would have been ready to do that. Like if I went out of supernatural ministry school when I graduated and someone said, Paul, are you ready to do stadium crusades? I'd say, yes, I'm ready. I'm ready. Give it to me. I planned all my life. I could do it. I'm ready. The reality was I wasn't ready. I didn't know I wasn't ready. God knew I wasn't ready. He knew I needed to be in a warehouse, packing boxes, loving it, using those times where I'm alone, where I'm just speaking in tongues and praising his name when nobody's around, building this character stuff in me that needed to be built so that when the time came, when God was ready to knock and said, okay, Paul, you're ready, I was able to step up and do it. Why? Because I learned to love my Leah. I want to submit this to you, and then we'll stand. I want to submit to you that your promise, that you believe is your promise, is a type of promise. But I believe your process will give you a greater promise that you don't even see yet. Why? It's interesting to me that even though Rachel is a promise unto Jacob, the promise of all promises didn't really come through Rachel. Jesus Christ came through the lineage of Leah, through Judah. And I want to submit to you that your promise is actually going to come through your process. It'll awaken you to your destiny. Why don't you stand?